This is the first video in a series about iconic films from each decade of the 20th century, a century marked not only by two world wars, but also by the rise, growth, and transformation of cinema. Let's begin with the 1920s, the era of silent films and the famous German Expressionism. A cult German horror film and a classic of silent cinema, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is considered the birth of German Expressionism in cinema, with a huge influence on the development of world cinema. It's regarded as the first film in history to depict the changing nature of human consciousness on screen. The film is a reflection on Germany's loss in World War I, a metaphor about the madness of power that plunges a helpless, submissive people into horror and tragedy. The main antagonist is the mysterious Dr. Caligari, who arrives in town and sets up a show at the local fair, displaying a somnambulist in a hypnotic sleep, obediently following his commands. With Dr. Caligari's arrival, a series of murders begins in the town. Charlie Chaplin's first feature film, which set the tone and themes for all of his later works as the greatest comedian of the silent era. A heartfelt tragicomedy about an infant whom a poor single mother decides to abandon in a luxury car, hoping that the wealthy family will take the child in and provide a better, more comfortable life. However, the car is stolen by criminals, and the baby is left in a slum, surrounded by trash bins, eventually finding his way into the arms of the kind and compassionate tramp, Chaplin's iconic character. The debate over whether Chaplin's films are more comedic or tragic could go on for a long time. But it's clear that the artist genuinely empathized with the lives of society's outcasts, criticized the class system, and romanticized and elevated the image of the ragged knight. A man without means or a home, but with a big heart. And it is with the kid that Chaplin's social stance and authorial ideology began to take shape and be voiced. Nosferatu is one of the greatest works of German director Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau, inventively reimagining Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. The film takes place in Transylvania, in the castle of the rat-like Count Orlok, and in the fictional German town of Wisborg, where the Count acquires property and spreads death. Nosferatu is the first vampire film in cinema history that has survived to this day, setting the stylistic tone for all subsequent vampire horror films, and the creepy, grotesque image created by actor Max Schreck became iconic. It was in Nosferatu that the theme of the vampire's death by sunlight first appeared, a concept absent in Stoker's novel. To create the dark, mystical atmosphere, Murnau used negative film stock, a technique no director had used before, and chose to shoot on location rather than in a studio, which was also rare at the time. Interestingly, after its release, Bram Stoker's widow, who was protecting her husband's copyright, won a lawsuit that led to the destruction of all copies of the film. However, by the time the ruling was made, Nosferatu had already spread across the world. Another landmark work by Murnau, a psychological drama about an elderly Swiss man who is fired from his job, heavily drinks, and goes through a deep personal crisis. Due to the lack of intertitles, this film is often regarded as a prime example of the silent era. The cinematography here is filled with experimental techniques and innovations, such as the groundbreaking portrayal of a drunken person's perspective using a shaky, downward-tilting camera. At first glance, Battleship Potemkin may seem like a propaganda film, created on a government commission to mark the anniversary of the Russian Revolution of 1905, and focused on the mutiny aboard the battleship Prince Potemkin Tavrichesky against imperialism. But Sergei Eisenstein, who was only 27 at the time, turned this commission into a masterpiece. Battleship Potemkin is one of the most quoted films in culture. Take, for example, the famous scene of the baby carriage rolling down the steps of the Potemkin stairs. Thought Robert Rodriguez or Spielberg was the first to use a striking red spot in a black and white film? It was Eisenstein in Battleship Potemkin. For the grand premiere at the Bolshoi Theater, he hand-painted the red flag on over 100 frames, leaving a lasting impact in an era of non-colored films. The pinnacle of German Expressionist cinema, Fritz Lang's epic and monumental dystopia foreshadows the rise of the National Socialists and the totalitarian dictatorship that Hitler would later establish. The story takes place in a futuristic world, in the fictional city of Metropolis, divided into two parts: the upper paradise, where the elite live in luxury, and the lower hell, where workers toil endlessly as mere appendages to the massive machines. The plot follows the protagonist, the son of the ruler of Metropolis, who meets and falls in love with a woman from the lower city, Maria, a reference to Mary Magdalene. He follows her into the depths of hell, where he faces a massive machine that grinds people to death, symbolizing the biblical Moloch demanding child sacrifices repeatedly. The first English-language film by German director Murnau, who had moved to Hollywood on an invitation. It was also the first film in history to win an Oscar for Best Picture at the inaugural Academy Awards ceremony in February 1929. Tired of his routine country life, a farmer becomes bewitched by a beguiling city woman who convinces him to murder his wife so they can live together. The man plans to murder his wife during a trip in their rowing boat, but things turn out differently. At the last moment, he rethinks his feelings and seeks forgiveness from his beloved. Janet Gaynor, who played the role of the wife, became the first actress in history to win an Oscar. At first glance, this seemingly simple musical film caused a true sensation at the time. The Jazz Singer is considered the first ever sound film in cinema history. While only some of the dialogue is spoken, mainly the singing of the main character, filmed in wide and medium shots to avoid noticeable lip-syncing mismatches, The Jazz Singer ushered in the era of sound cinema and marked the end of the silent film era. At the first Academy Awards ceremony, the film was given a special award for pioneering the first sound film that revolutionized the industry. It also addressed pressing racial and cultural issues, as well as the themes of outdated norms and societal stereotypes. The main character, who dreams of performing jazz, is forced to hide his Jewish background, escape from his Orthodox parents, and even coat himself in shoe polish before each performance to resemble an African American, since jazz was considered black music. Meanwhile, a masterpiece emerged in French silent cinema from Danish director Carl Theodor Dreyer, a historical psychological drama depicting the torture of Joan of Arc by the Inquisition, culminating in her public execution by burning. Filmed in a documentary style, the movie convincingly recreates not so much the historical events themselves, although the set designs were the most expensive in French cinema at the time, as the reality of this semi-mythical figure, the martyr woman who burned for her truth. Unprecedented for its time, the director's complete rejection of makeup was a bold choice. The pure, natural face of Renée Falconetti, captured in close-ups, highlighted the inner strength of her character and the sincerity of her faith. While the British banned the film due to the sadistic portrayal of English soldiers, The Passion of Joan of Arc received widespread acclaim across the rest of the world. Along with Murnau's Sunrise, Wings was another film to win the first ever Oscar for Best Picture. This can cause some confusion, as the award was given in two categories at the time, one for Outstanding Film and one for Unique Artistic Achievement. Murnau's film won in the second category, while Wings, a military melodrama directed by William Wellman, took the prize in the first category. The story centers on a love triangle between two fighter pilots and a woman during World War I. However, the uniqueness of Wings wasn't in its romantic drama, who would the heroine choose, but in its groundbreaking aerial combat scenes, which had no equivalents at the time.